Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you all out here. I know you're a bright, intelligent group because you were able to negotiate daylight savings time, get here on time. Way to go. Give yourselves a hand for that. I'm Dick Fitzmaurice. Yeah, give yourselves a hand for that. I'm Dick Fitzmaurice. I'm the immediate past president of the Arca of California and still on the board of directors. It's my pleasure to be the MC for the event this weekend. Glad that you're all here. It's a joint production, of course, of the Arca of California and United Cerebral Palsy. The Arca of California UCP collaboration has been going strong for several years now, and it's very effective when it comes to getting things done here in Sacramento, and that is a fact that if you don't know already, which many of you I'm sure do, it will become real clear this weekend. A couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the restrooms are out the back doors here and to the right. They're just out in the hallway there. Also in the hallway is a very cool demonstration. If you were here with us last year, you probably took a ride in the virtual car that AT&T has put up, which is, what do they call that? Not artificial intelligence, but the other one. Virtual reality, yeah. So it's you drive the car, and if you start to text, all the disasters that can happen when you start doing that. And it's fun to do, but it's also a very important message, so try it out during one of the breaks. Also want to mention that parking, you can get a discount on your parking if you parked at the hotel. All you have to do is take your parking ticket to the front desk and tell them you're with the ARC UCP Public Policy Conference, and you'll save half on the $28 fee, so you pay $14 instead of $28. And for all you people who do want to text while you're sitting rather than driving, the Wi-Fi code for the hotel is 031718. 031718. That's actually St. Patty's Day, so you can remember that. Want to thank the sponsors. AT&T, of course, has been with us for several years now. AT&T gives you more for your thing, whatever your thing is. More entertainment, internet, and unlimited plans. And more for your thing, that's AT&T's thing. Haven't read something like that in a long time. It's fun. Conference partners, Cal Able and the California Endowment. Conference sponsors, the ARC of Ventura County, the ARC of San Diego, and Therap, who has been with us for a long time. Event sponsor, Nonprofits United. Community sponsor, thanks to Metaskid, Premier Healthcare Services, and the ARC of Placer County. Scholarship sponsor, the California Supported Living Network, and Care Providers Insurance Services. So we want to thank them. And we also encourage you to visit the tables, which are out in the hallway, and find out what those people have to offer. So a round of applause, please, for our corporate sponsors. Thank you. Our first panel today is entitled The State of the State in Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. We have a panel discussion to tackle that subject with representatives from the Lanterman Coalition. So not only does the ARC and UCP speak as one voice, they jointly chair the Lanterman Coalition, a group of some 20 organizations that provide various services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They also join the chorus, so to speak. When the Lanterman Coalition speaks, the legislature listens. The panel today is moderated by Jordan Lindsay. You may remember from last year, we introduced Jordan last year, the first time that we could introduce him as the executive director of the ARC of California. He'd been on the job for, 6-7 hours at the time? Something like that. But now he's a vet. He's been here a year, but it seems like he's a vet of 10 years. He has really taken on the job and run with it, and it's terrific. Jordan has held a variety of advocacy positions in Sacramento before joining the ARC of California, but he also worked for us at one time heading up our Partners in Policymaking program. So please welcome Jordan Lindsay.
Thank you, everybody, and it is wonderful to see you. And yes, as Dick mentioned, everybody here passed that cool test we put on you, conference day, same day as daylight savings. Next year, we'll keep that one in mind, but no promises. One of the things I love most about this conference is that I get to hear Dick's voice for like 2 days on a microphone, which is just made for this. So many appreciations to him as well for being our MC for the whole weekend. And I'm thrilled to kick off this first session. And what we're going to do for you is really lay the groundwork of what is happening in the state, what is happening around the country in our first 2 sessions. And nobody in the state will be able to lay that groundwork better than the people up here on this panel. So I'm thrilled to introduce them and then hand it over to them to update us on what is happening in the state that impacts our community, our families, our people, and those that we love. So first to my left is Aaron Carruthers. He currently serves as the Executive Director of the California State Council on Developmental Disabilities. He's also been the Chief Deputy Director of the State Council and California Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission and the California Department of Corrections Rehabilitation Division of Correctional Healthcare Services. He was a principal consultant for the California State Senate, a field representative for the California State Assembly, and a member of the Attorney General's executive team. He's a graduate of the National Leadership Consortium on Developmental Disabilities and was a Choral Fellow in Public Affairs. Please welcome Aaron. To my far right is Jackie Dillard Foss. Jackie's been part of the California Supported Living Network Board of Directors since 1996, serving with Carol McKinney as co-chair of the overall network. Jackie currently serves with Carol as co-chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee. In her position as CEO of STEP Agency, Jackie has been managing the organization's supported living services since 1994. STEP serves 165 consumers, with a majority receiving 24/7 support. STEP has 500 employees and has worked diligently to provide a comprehensive benefits package to the employees of the agency. And over 125 of STEP's employees are deaf, and they provide the support to their deaf and or deafblind consumers. Meantime, STEP is proud of its Human Resources Department and become proficient in labor laws, IHSS issues, and workers' compensation. Please welcome Jackie. Next to her is Barry Giardini. Barry joined California Disabilities Services Association as its Director of Government Affairs in December of 2015. He came to CDSA with significant legislative and legal experience working on public health, fair housing, and disability issues. He served as a legislative manager with the California Department of Public Health, counsel with the Assembly Judiciary Committee, and as the commission attorney for the Sacramento Regional Human Rights Fair Housing Commission. Please welcome Barry Giardini. And then finally to my immediate right is Amy Wessling, the Executive Director of the Association of Regional Center Agencies, or Arca. She joined Arca in 2012 and is focused on services for children at risk of developmental disabilities, accessing health insurance, funding for autism services, and the funding needs of California's developmental services system. Prior to that, she worked for Alta California Regional Center, coordinating the movement of individuals with developmental disabilities from institutional to community settings, and for Central Valley Regional Center, overseeing service coordination in rural Merced and Mariposa counties. Please welcome Amy and the whole panel with me. So we're going to allow each of them to discuss a little bit about what they see in the state and what is happening and what we can expect, and then we'll get into a little bit of discussion. There will also be a time for Q&A at the end of every session, and there are cards on your table. And the way we're doing it this year is if you have a question, please write your question on the cards, and you can hold it up, and we have volunteers. Teresa, I see walking around. We'll have a couple other volunteers. We'll grab those questions, and we'll read them at the end of the sessions to the panelists and to the speakers. So at first, I'm going to hand it over to Amy Wessling, Director of Arca, to begin.
I'm always very cautious when I put a glass of water on a podium. I have actually knocked it off and hit a wall, but there's no wall here, just Barry, so my apologies. So congratulations, as Jordan said, you all made it here, and it is daylight savings time. I have a bigger challenge that I have a camera directly in front of me and need to look not as tired as I feel. But the good news is that I have a lot of passion for what I'm about to talk to you about. I think it's essential that as we kick off a conference like this, that we start with remembering where we've all come from. And so I was asked this morning to talk about the history of the system and kind of where we are today in a big picture kind of way. And then there'll be other members of the panel who will talk about specifics that they see in their work. So if we look back about 50 years, there were about 13,500 people with developmental disabilities living in state institutions. And there was a wait list to get in. California wasn't alone in this dynamic. And in the mid-1960s or early 1960s, President Kennedy begged the nation to do something different, something better, to provide people with a life in the community of their choosing. And here in California, we know that lots of moms and dads, mostly moms, came to Sacramento and pushed for the exact same thing. Because at this time, if you had a child with a developmental disability, you really had two choices. You could put them in a state developmental center and walk away, or you could take care of them on your own 24/7 with no support from your community. At this time, children with significant disabilities didn't even have the right to go to school. So this really was a very, very difficult choice. And it was through the leadership of parents who said there has to be a different alternative. There has to be something different and something better. So in 1966, there was a bill introduced by Mr. Waldy, and there was a movement to say, let's try something different. Let's try to provide services to children and their families and communities and see how it goes. With a relatively small investment, there were 2 regional centers opened at that time, one in LA through Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and one in the San Francisco area. And the experiment worked. Families found that they were happier, that they were able to maintain their children at home as part of their families and begin to make them part of their communities. And so in 1969, through much, much advocacy from families, just like families who are here today, Assemblymember Lanterman, can't believe I almost just forgot his name. That's embarrassing. Anyway, Assemblymember Lanterman pushed through a bill that was signed by then Governor Reagan to make the system statewide. The vision at that time was 1 regional center for every 1 million people in the state, and there were about 21 million people at the time. So the system was born, and the system grew, and the system thrived. And it was based on a few key concepts. First, that communities, rather than the state, would be in control. You see, state agencies have a way, even when they have district offices, of being very Sacramento-centric. And the goal was for this system to be different, to be directly responsive to the needs of individual communities. That's why regional centers are independent nonprofits, because they have boards of directors made up of their communities that help to direct the center and help to steer its course. When all of this was happening, state employees were a little bit perturbed and sued the state in response to this, saying, this is the work of the state. This is the work of state employees. And the case wound its way through the California court system, as things tend to do. And the ruling at the end of the day by a judge was essentially, just because a state can do a function doesn't mean it should. In fact, the analogy he used was, just because someone can go to the store to buy ingredients doesn't mean they should be the one to make the cake. And the system that was born was one of incredible partnership between families, between individuals with developmental disabilities, between regional centers, and between service providers who do the hard work day by day by day, doing the direct service with families and providing them with that support that they need and the support for individuals to live meaningful lives in the community. So fast forwarding to today, the system now supports about 300,000 people, including about 10% of those who are children who are at risk of developmental disabilities. And the amazing thing is the rate of growth. We expect in the next year that an additional 15,000 people will be added to the system. And we know also that the demographics of the system have changed. In the early days of the system, it was a service system set aside for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And over the years, other conditions were added as well: autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, conditions similar to intellectual disabilities. And so we serve a much wider system of folks who need support and who need assistance and who have visions for what they want to see in their future. And I have the great privilege of being able to work in this system and being able to see that, unlike in lots of parts of the country, while we're not perfect, we do our best to ensure that people get to direct their own lives, get to come up with goals and objectives that are meaningful for them, that it's not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all system. And as California has become more diverse, so too has the population that regional centers support. In California today, we have no one race or ethnicity that's over 50% of our population, which is unique for the country. We are a majority-minority state, and that's amazing. In the regional center system, there are over 45 languages spoken. We know that Spanish and English account for about 95% of the population we support, but there's that other 5% that speaks a rich tapestry of languages, and there are cultures that represent California. And the system today is working to embrace and support individuals and their families and support them where they are to get to where they want to be. And our vision for the future has changed. It used to be that supporting people outside of the walls of a state institution, that was revolutionary. And as the state's developmental centers march towards closure, we know that today we have to do more and we have to do better. We have to help people to become part of communities, and we have to support them to do that. So our next challenge is finding ways to help communities to recognize that individuals with developmental disabilities don't just have the right to be tolerated in communities, but that they contribute to the rich life that is community. And that the real goal of our system is to support people to live lives in communities of their choosing. And it's a great honor to get to see this system transform and move towards that reality and support people in individualized ways, in ways that they want to be supported. And so I thank you all for being here this morning to talk about some of the key issues in this great work. And thank you for getting up so early on a Sunday, and for most of you coming to Sacramento to do that, and just also for the dedication, not only giving up your weekend, but dedicating your lives to this essential work. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Aaron Carruthers with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. And Amy, thank you very much for that fantastic setting of the stage of how we came to be where we are today. We are tasked with talking about the state of developmental disabilities, kind of like a state of the state address. In thinking about what's happening out there in the world, I think we should start by asking what's happening first within ourselves. There's a lot happening. If you look to Washington, D.C., look what's happening to providers in the communities, knowing about what's happening in each individual family's day-to-day life. Just by a show, let's do a gut check. Let's just look inside and do a gut check. By a show of hands, who's nervous about what's going on in the world today? Yeah, that's fair. That seems reasonable. You're in good company. Sometimes we don't talk about it. It's good to know. We're all nervous together. Show of hands. Who actually feels like we're being targeted? We, in the services that we need, are being targeted. Who actually feels that we're under attack? Look at that. It's a pretty serious state of affairs, and I agree with you on all of it. For every piece, every time you feel, here's what I want to leave you with. I'm going to keep repeating it. Every time you feel nervous, targeted, under attack, I want to make sure you know that we as a community are resilient, unmoved, and standing strong. Let's talk about specifics. Looking at what's happening, yes. Let's talk about specifics. Looking at Washington, D.C., last year they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they tried to reduce funding for Medicaid in doing that. And what happened? We stopped them in their tracks. That is some applause right there. They cut taxes, and immediately the leadership in D.C. started talking about entitlement reform. We know what that means. We know what that's code for. That's coming for our services. They tried to do that, and we were drug out of the halls of Congress. H.R. 620, delay of justice by trying to reform ADA. We shut down the Capitol phone system in response to it. Each time that we stop something bad from happening, we can count that as progress. We may be nervous, but we're resilient. And the thing in D.C. is that disability community is getting the credit for making these things happen. We're part of a broader civil rights organization. But as we've been doing our work, sometimes we kind of do it on our own. Lately, we've been doing it together in uniform with all the other civil rights entities, and we're the ones getting credit for it. Repealing the Affordable Care Act is a really good example. Now, other people who were interested in making sure that didn't happen were the state directors of the Medicaid entities. That's in California, that's Jennifer Kent. She's the head of the Department of Healthcare Services. And all the state directors from every state said, you can't repeal this money. Were they the ones getting credit for actually stopping it? Were they the ones that actually were in the news for making it happen? No, it was the disability community who was in the right place at the right time when the cameras were rolling to say, this needs to stop. When we stop things from happening, we're making progress. But it's not enough for us. The theme of this conference is looking forward into the future. And as we look forward in the future, we have reasons to be hopeful about some of the activities to work on. The first thing that we should be looking at is employment. When the State Council asked the community, what is it you'd like us to work on? The number one answer was employment. That's a big shift from what it's been in the past. Our plan represents the voices of 3,400 people. Employment, employment, employment. So what are we doing about it? State Council's authored legislation, 1724, to get better data about employment outcomes. So if someone's working, what do we know about their impact on benefits? Are they still on benefits? Benefits increasing? Benefits going down? What are we knowing about how much they're earning out in the community? Let's see who's working. Let's get the information. Let's go back to the legislatures and say, look, employment works. Here's the impact. Fund more employment services. We're also working on legislation, AB 2171. We call it the One Person, One Goal Plan. For employment, we have different entities who work on employment for people with developmental disabilities. There is there's DDS, Department of Rehab, Department of Education. They all have a piece in it. They've come together and issued a blueprint on competitive integrative employment. This blueprint is a really great good faith effort of three big giant departments saying how we're going to work together. We've introduced legislation to actually push them a little bit further, to tell them you each have planning processes. How are all your planning processes at least going to be coordinated toward the goal of employment? You each have person-centered planning mandates. How are you going to coordinate this so I as a person don't go here and have to go through a person-centered planning process, then go here and have to do it again, then go here and have to do it again? You each have data. You have my data. You have information about me. How can I have access to that to make it portable so I can share it with the other departments who may need it and may learn from it? Trying to push the systems to get integrated so I as one person have one experience toward one goal. So that's some of the work around employment. Another piece to look at and think about is self-determination. We've been talking about self-determination for 4.5 years since it was signed. Where is it? The process is being pushed to get the state to issue its waiver to the federal government. Weekly, the Department of Developmental Services holds a call of its workforce group, and where it is the department has finished its work. It's the last stage of the process within healthcare services, and I'm hopeful it's imminent. I'm hoping it's tomorrow. I'm hoping it's Tuesday. The State Council hosts a statewide self-determination advisory committee that's meeting on Tuesday, and we're optimistic that we're going to get good news from the department. Otherwise, the department has to come and face 21 very frustrated, angry leaders of their local self-determination advisory committees. Once it's passed, we then need to talk about implementation. Getting the waiver to the federal government means there'll be a 90-day period where we're waiting to hear as the federal government reviews it. Once the 90 days done, then it's time for people to start beginning, the first 2,500 to begin enrollment in self-determination. There's a lot to get figured out about how do we do it. How is the fiscal agent, the fiscal management services going to work? How do we choose them? Will there be competition? How's my individual budget going to work? We have a sense as to how it's going to be set up based on my prior years of service. What if my needs go up? What if I'm new to the system? How does my budget get determined? So on Tuesday, the State Council Statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee is going to be looking at some of those implementation questions to begin advising the department. The next piece for hope and moving toward the future is housing. Housing. And I know it's a priority for the Lanterman Coalition. We have a unique resource and asset in the closure of the developmental centers. The Legislative Analyst Office says they believe there's $100 million annually, ongoing, that could be available in the future to our system. There's the sale of the property themselves. Where does that money go? The Lanterman Coalition and the State Council believes that those properties were created as an investment by the state for the care and housing of the people we love. Sonoma's been around for 127 years, and we believe that whatever they decide to do with those dollars, it should fund care and housing for the next 127 years for the people we care and love. So when you go to the Capitol on Tuesday, today, tomorrow, you're just going to get information. You're going to get details. You're going to get direction. You're going to get inspiration. And then you're going to get unleashed onto the Capitol to go have visits. Advocate for these issues. Because every time you're feeling nervous, remember, we as a community are resilient. And every time you're feeling that we're under attack, remember the times when we were unmoved. Every time you feel like we're targeted, remember how strong we are. Thank you.
Barry Giardini from CDSA, come on up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Barry Giardini. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the California Disabilities Services Association. It's nice to look out and see some familiar faces, some new ones as well that I'm not as familiar with, but it's a great pleasure to be back here. I think Amy and I were reflecting right before we began that it seems ridiculous that it's been a year since we were here. I'm sure it feels the same way for Jordan. It's been a whirlwind. But I want to take a minute and just say last year when we were up here, we had a great advocate with us, Dwight Hansen, and we lost him this year. And I just want to take a moment to reflect on all he did for our community and how grateful we are for all his efforts. So yeah, I'm here to kind of give the political landscape, what we're dealing with in California. I think Aaron did a nice job covering some of the challenges we're facing at the federal level. But I want to give just kind of an overview of where we are as the state of California going into this second year of the two-year budget cycle, or of the legislative cycle. We are at a place where we have a legislature that's jockeying for positions. We have shifting leadership. On the Senate side, we're going to have a new president of the Senate. Tony Atkins from San Diego. From those of you from San Diego, make sure you note that one down. The previous pro tem, Kevin De Leon, is now running for Senate against Senator Feinstein. So there's a lot of shifting and different things happening. You also may have heard that there have been some improprieties with legislators. So things are a little bit touchy at the Capitol, and I think it's a good thing that we're finally airing some of this stuff out, but things are different. Oh, touchy. Oh, dear. It's early. That was unintended. Thank you all. Things were touchy, and things are hopefully getting a little bit better, I think is what I meant to say. Wow. Okay, we're going to try to recover. So it's caused a few legislators to step down, and one of the things that's done is the Democrats had achieved a supermajority, which means that they had more than 2/3 of both the Assembly and the Senate in our state. as a result of some of the resignations for improprieties, we no longer have that supermajority. Now, you could question how valuable that supermajority is going to be. Not all Democrats are made alike, and I'm not really sure it would have achieved a consistent two-thirds voting block, but nonetheless, that's where we are. So there is at least a little bit of balance between the two parties here in California. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. We also have a governor who's on his last year of his final term being the governor of California, Jerry Brown. He has... Yes, Jim, I hear you. So Jerry's on his way out, and there's a lot of concern about what he's going to do. He has been particularly fiscally responsible. He has not been particularly responsive to the needs of our community at all. In fact, the only thing that he's done for us was facilitated through billboards shaming him and other things, and really a confluence of good fortune, and not necessarily on his own accord. So we're looking at new leadership going forward. So one of the things that I think all of the advocates up here are doing are trying to get messaging out about some of the challenges facing the system going forward. That's relevant now because we need our legislators and our governor to pay attention, hopefully this year. But it's also relevant because we've got new governor coming in next year for sure. We don't know who it'll be exactly, but we do know we'll have a new governor. And we want to make sure that they understand some of the challenges facing our community. And one of the things Jordan's been heading up as chair of the Lanterman Coalition is an effort to try to get next year all the gubernatorial candidates together. We were hoping to host a forum on what would have been Tuesday? Would have been Tuesday at the Crest Theater. It was going to kind of be the summation of this conference. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the top two candidates for governor to commit to the forum. Gavin Newsom and Antonio Villaraigosa were not going to make it. So we are amending our course. We're hoping to get candidate interviews. And I think the point is we want to make sure we get on record with them our concerns, but we also want to hear from them what they think about our community. Have they given us any thought? What is their plan for our community going forward? Because we are facing a lot of challenges. The good news is I don't have to be the one to depress us all with all the challenges. Many of you know them already. Jackie's going to clean up and do that for us. But I do want to talk about some of the things that we are advocating for in the budget cycle. I know many of you will be going to meetings with legislators in the next couple of days, and there are a few things that you should be aware of that the advocates are pushing on the budget side. We had our first budget subcommittee hearing last week with the Assembly, and we have another one this week on the Senate. And that's really where we flesh out all the different things that we're hoping to get money for in the budget, and things that we're trying to eliminate in the budget. So I guess I'll start with the depressing and then go for the optimistic, let's fight for it. So one of the things that the governor's proposed in the budget for DD services in the upcoming year is a reinstitution of the uniform holiday schedule. And many of you will probably recall that back in 2009 when the budget was much tighter, when we didn't have a $6.1 billion surplus that we have today, they implemented a lot of cost savings measures in our industry, and one of those was in the uniform holiday schedule mandating 14 forced closure days. So today there is no uniform holiday schedule at all, or there wasn't, but because of a lawsuit by the Arca and UCP of Sacramento, or of San Diego, right? They brought a lawsuit that halted that implementation of that 14-day holiday schedule. Unfortunately, due to some stuff that happened in the federal level, lack of standing, that injunction is gone. So the state is now, again, proposing to re-implement these 14 days. What that means is that for many services, including day services and other services, you will not be able to get your family member support for 14 days per year. It means if you're a provider, you will not be able to get reimbursed for services provided. If you're a direct service professional, it means that even though we got a wage and benefit pass-through a couple years ago to try to help you, we're cutting your wages by 4 days in the next fiscal year. So one of the things that makes me a little bit optimistic is at the Assembly Budget Subcommittee hearing last week, we talked about a lot of issues. The only one that really got action from the members of the panel was this proposal to re-implement the 14-day holiday schedule. Assemblymember Woods, seconded by Assemblymember Mathis, moved to deny and reject this proposal by the governor. Due to some technical procedural things that the chair was discussing, he said, we're going to hold it open, but it was a show that we have some legislative support to get rid of this proposal. And we're hoping that we can, but particularly for family members and for providers as well, this is something that at a time of great surplus of, I mentioned $6.1 billion, to save roughly $5 million of the general fund, I mean, it's almost insulting. And so that's the message we've been carrying to our legislators, and we hope that if you're meeting with legislators, you will point that out as well and really try to curry their support for this, because it's pretty outrageous, if you ask me. On the optimistic side, we have advocates who are fighting for things that matter to individuals that we serve. So there's a big push to restore social recreational services and camping. I mentioned that in 2009 there were cuts. Well, social rec and camping were one of the services that were cut and no longer allowed going forward. So there's a push this year to try to get that re-implemented through the budget process. I know some of the advocates up here are pushing really hard on that, and it is something that speaks to addressing some of the racial disparities that Amy was speaking to, and it's really something that its time has come, and we certainly should see that reinstituted for this year. Another thing, I see Steve Miller over there, and I want to give him a little bit of credit on this. I think people should know that he has been critical in getting Assemblymember Holden to become a champion for local cost pressures on providers. As you may or may not know, there are many local ordinances in our state where you have to pay a local minimum wage higher than the state minimum wage. What that means for providers of services is they get no reimbursement for when they have to pay people a higher local minimum wage in this state. The state does not recognize those costs. So Steve has really gotten Assemblymember Holden locked into this issue, and there is a $25 million budget ask from Assemblymember Holden this year in the budget process to address that, so that we don't lose a whole group of providers who have otherwise no way to recognize their costs. And this isn't about just providers. It's really about services that they provide, because if they can't keep their doors open, consumers lose their services, individuals sit at home, they're losing the access to things that and necessary supports to make their lives full. So I want to just say thank you to Steve on that. CDSA has also put in a budget ask for we should give him a round of applause. I know. Sorry, Steve. CDSA has also put in a budget ask for a 4% increase to rates across the board for providers, so that we can stabilize the system as we go into the future. You may or may not know that there's a rate study currently going on. We know that the rate study should yield an outcome showing that rates are inadequate for providers, because we know that because providers are going out of business. People are on internal wait lists. People are not receiving the services of their choice. They're receiving the services that are available. And those are the types of things we can allow. The 4% budget ask would help stabilize us until the rate study comes good. We hope it comes good and yields larger rate increases in the future, but it's something that we're pushing. And we want you to be aware of that as you're going around doing some advocacy. The final thing I'll mention, and Jordan has really spearheaded this, so I want to give him credit, is that the Lanterman Coalition has taken action to address trying to get an infusion of money into our system, particularly related to housing, as the developmental centers close. Amy spoke eloquently on the closure of the developmental centers. We are at a point where the DCs are closing. The state's going to have to do something with them. Jordan has been wrangling all of us cats in the Lanterman Coalition to try to get us, mobilized on making sure that once those buildings are closed and the state sells them, we keep some of the money from those savings and from the sale or from the lease, and we reinvest that into integrated community living. So we create some affordable living in the community. We know that affordable living is a huge challenge in California. It's particularly a challenge for individuals with developmental disabilities, and this would really start to at least speak to that problem. So it's something that we're working on. I'll probably leave it there. There is more I could talk about, but I'll let Jackie come up here and tell you about some of the challenges facing providers. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.
I think they decided I should be the depressing person, but I'm going to try not to be depressing. I was thinking while everybody was talking about the ABX 2-1 fight, right? For that 2 years, it felt like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. the providers and the advocates really mobilized. And you would see that they would show up because they had something to fight for. It feels like since that happened that the legislature said, you're taken care of, sit down, shut up, you're fine. And I think it's really important as providers that we say, no, we're not fine. The ABX 2-1, I don't know how much relief all of you got from ABX 2-1, the money that came in. Your turnover went way down, right? Everybody's turnover went way down. My turnover went way down by 1%. And I think you have to remember that is they have to know time in. I was looking at Steve while we were talking and going, it's an ongoing, nonstop fight. I mean, I think part of that is the assembly saying, you know what? You guys aren't going to show up. They put us in room 447. If you know what room 447 is, it's the smallest, one of the smallest rooms you can have because they like the providers won't show up. They used to put us in the big room because our providers and advocates would show up. And I think we have to remind ourselves, we are always in a crisis mode until they decide not to put us there. I was telling them I find it really sad and disheartening as a provider to say, I'm here on behalf of my direct support professionals. Yes, direct support professionals. And what we're asking for is you to give them minimum wage in these 23 counties. I think they are not ashamed of this conversation, that we're asking you to pay our direct support professionals more than In-N-Out Burger. If you're not irate about that, I'm irate that I said, you know what, right now, I have to figure out that when $12 hits, I was, happy that in Sacramento, my rates were established in 2005. I'm like, woo, I'm way ahead of some of you that had your rates established in 1970, 80, 90, and you've been stuck. That I have to go, wow, I'm at $11.50 an hour. I'm 50 cents above minimum wage so that you can work and do the intimate care of a person with an intellectual disability when they need a shower. What are we saying to those people we support and to families when we're saying your son and daughter will have their most intimate care done by that someone is probably going to be there for 6 months? If we're lucky, a year. If we're really lucky, 2 years. And I think we have to say to ourselves, we need to say, no, this is not okay. Enough is enough. I just, as a provider, get really frustrated. We're also talking about housing, right? I have Sacramento, and I know the Bay Area. It's horrible. We're in the Bay Area. If you're talking to providers there, a 1-bedroom, 1-bath for $1,400, $1,500 a month. Well, one is not only are you talking about a person with an intellectual disability hoping they're never going to live in their own apartment. That's gone. But that's also for your direct support professionals. They're supposed to live off of minimum wage and the housing prices. And I think there's a point where we have to say, wait a minute here. I'm offended. I was sitting in that hearing in the hallway, and at number 3 on the agenda was the safety net. Well, they weren't talking about all of you. You're not the safety net. That's not who they were talking about. They were talking about the millions and millions of dollars they're going to flow out of the developmental center to fund those programs, because I guess if the person was there forever, the 573 people, you should get millions of dollars of services because you're leaving the developmental center into the community, where eventually you all know they're going to come to your program and you're going to have to say, sorry, I have to pay you minimum wage to work with this person that had a staff person that was making $25, $26, $27 an hour. And we're supposed to say that's good enough. I think we have to get to the point where we're saying it's not good enough. If we really want to say a person is a direct support professional, then we have to say we mean it. We're not joking around with you guys. They do more than flip a burger. And I think that's really hard. I think, when Steve would call, how do we mobilize people, Jackie? How do we get people at the state capitol, Jackie? It's the people in this room and us training and teaching our advocates. I was listening to Aaron talk about the advocates. Well, let's be very clear. I was at the Arc UCP conference, the Arc conference in D.C. The advocates that were there was ADAPT. The advocates that were there were laying down in the rotunda. The advocates that were there were in the hallway saying, no, we're not going to be nice. We're not going to be polite. And we are such a polite system. Thank God ARC San Diego said, you know what, a shame on you board. I am proud to say that STEP and the CSLN led the charge for shame on you in Sacramento. Because you know what, it is a shame on you to say we are not enough. 300,000 people, how many in the system? 340,000 people, folks. 340,000 people, and we're not the safety net? I think, wait a minute here, we're begging you once again to recognize what we do. I'm looking at Dr. Baladarian and going, and we're hoping and praying that person that comes in their life doesn't abuse their son or daughter. We're praying. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to give you minimum wage. We're going to beg for you to go and fund 23 counties for minimum wage. I stand up there sometimes and going, I'm so sick and tired of being politically correct for our system. I don't know how many of you are tired of begging to do the right thing. I'm just tired of saying, we're going to come up there to you and say, please make sure we pay a wage that this person's going to have a support person for the next 5 years. Because we all know stability. We want to talk about employment. Well, a job coach, we all know when I listen to the employers who hire our folks, a job coach is important on the consistency of that job, but we're going to pay you less than we're asking for you to pay that person to get a job there. Is there an ironic kind of sick twist to all of this, right? I'm going to be depressing. Well, you know, usually Jackie's I can be sarcastic and I can be funny, but I'm really frustrated. I'm frustrated for 20 years. I say hallelujah, December 31st, 2018, they're locking the doors and they're leaving the grounds of Sonoma Developmental Center. And we have to go to them and say, gee, we would really like for you to be put us on the panel to talk about what to do with this land. I don't know. We've been there since 1891, living and dying at Sonoma, but we have to beg you to go and give us money so we can get affordable housing in the community, and we have to tell you why it makes sense. Go by the memorial garden where people died there. That's what I think. Has anybody been to Sonoma and they show you the graveyard? There's a graveyard at Sonoma Developmental Center with little metal markers. They told me when I went on that tour at Sonoma Developmental Center, hey, we let grandma and grandpa go up on the hill to find their son or daughter. I said, no, you don't. It's a hill. They're 90 years old. I wasn't crying with a lot of people. I was pissed off because that's not who we are. We respect the people we support. We hold them up and we say, yes, you can. A life of integration and inclusion is possible. But we're going to say, please give us the money from Fairview. Don't shut the doors and give it to the university. I just go sometimes, I go behind the doors and I talk the nice talk, right? And I smile. But I think, man, have any of you ever toured Sonoma Developmental Center? Anybody ever gone there? Has it been pleasant? You're like, wow, this is awesome. I'm trying to help a gentleman. STEP is at North Bay Regional Center, and we are doing supported living. We're trying to help. One person, they're saying, can come out of supported living. This young man was placed at Sonoma Developmental Center at the age of 5. He went over to Agnews for a brief moment, came back. He has been in the developmental center system for 68 years. 68 years. He was 5 years old. He's never known anything different. They're like, but he can't live far from the grounds because this is all he knows. You guys should be ashamed of yourself. Of course it's going to be culture shock. You've been there 68 years. He doesn't even know, but I think for him, I'm like, man, what stories? But for him, what are the stories he sees from the places, that metamorphosis of a developmental center over the last 68 years? I just think, man, we do really cool stuff. I have a lot of folks that are considered very challenging. And they're like, well, if not for you, they'd be in a developmental center. No, if not for all of us. That's what we've done. The Arca has taken a lead, and they're powerful, and you look at the Lanterman Act. That's what families did. I was talking to Mary. We were having lunch, and she was saying, how do you encourage these families? And I'm like, man, we're here to stand for justice. And if we don't remember we're here to stand for justice, we will lose everything. So get a little adapt, not too much. I don't want you to lay down and not be able to get back up, because I just had a knee replacement, and if I laid down, I would not get back up. It would be really ugly. So I'm saying on the grassroots side, what do we have to do? We have to stay. What is that new thing? #woke. We have to stay woke. Because once we close our eyes, I know it sounds cool for me. I saw you laugh. I know. I'm 52 years old and I say woke. Don't follow me on Twitter. I'll offend somebody. I know I will. Jim, I would offend you. Don't follow me on Twitter, love. I love you. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. No, don't do it, honey. You like me now. Don't follow me on Twitter. I just think we all have to stay really aware and don't get complacent, because the moment we get complacent is the moment we get run over. So I'm just asking you as providers, as family members, to go and re-engage those advocates. It's a day in and day out process, and I will tell you, the advocates that are part of STEP, they come up to me and they're like, when are we going to the Capitol next? I'm like, people are like, wow, you get people there. No, they find me on Facebook, they find me on Twitter. They want to know, when do we get a fight for our rights? It's the same thing for your direct support professional. You need to give them the opportunity to be respected and know that they have a voice. ABX 2-1 was a great morale booster for my DSPs. They went, wow, it worked. And then afterwards they're like, well, crap, because the minimum wage happened soon after. I think it's really sad that we have to fight for compaction too. It pisses me off too. I have a couple of things that have my list of I'm annoyed. It's Sunday. I'm annoyed that I got woke up an hour early because of daylight savings. So they went and they said, could we have that Jackie that didn't have daylight savings? So I'm going to go back to drinking my coffee and being nice. I just want you guys, stay awake, stay present. It gets depressing. I know it does. Take your Prozac, wake up in the morning, and let's keep on fighting. Do not stop, because it's not going to get easier, folks. It's not. But we're going to do this all together. I'll show up if you show up, so let's all show up, and we'll all be woke together.
Thank you very much to our panelists. You can understand why we thought that these would be the perfect kickoff to our conference to set the foundation of where we're going. If you have a question, please write it on the card and lift it up. Teresa will come around, or someone else, and we'll get to your questions. And while she's doing that, I'm going to pose a quick question to Aaron. Aaron, you were talking about self-determination. Will you just give a little more background on where the state has been, where we're going in the pilot, and just a little more information about self-determination to the crowd?
So when I spoke about self-determination, I spoke from the perspective that I assume folks knew what the program was. Show of hands, who feels like they know enough about self-determination that they could actually describe the program to the person sitting next to them? Okay, so that's a pretty good showing. That's good. So what self-determination does is it allows me as a client of the regional center to not have to go through my program coordinator for my services. They decide, look at my past year of services, see the amount that has been that was spent for my services, and gives me the ability to manage that budget through a fiscal agent, through a service coordinator. I'm sorry, not a service coordinator, but the independent facilitator, and to get the services out in the community. To the extent that I am able to find services that would be reimbursed by the federal government under CMS, then I could get those services for what I need. An interesting example I think comes to mind is Soch and Wrecking Camp. All of us, when we're talking about priorities for next year, we're all fighting to get that restored through regional center services. Good reason to believe that if I had self-determination, I'd be able to get that now on my own. So the legislation passed, was signed 4.5 years ago. In that, it stated that we needed to set up a pilot program. We have to get permission from the federal government to do that pilot program. That process is done through what's called a waiver process. We're in the process of creating the waiver. It's taken 4.5 years to write it. And we are on the brink of submitting it formally to the federal government. Once we submit it to them, they'll have 90 days to review it and respond and say they approve it or have questions about it or deny it. Once they approve it, then we can begin the process for the first 2,500 people. That will be over 3 years. We'll test the system, pilot it with, we've had a pilot. We've had a pilot for 15 years with people who've been in it. This would expand it out to 2,500, and then after the 3 years, it'd be eligible for every regional center client. Is that what you're looking for?
A question, and I'll let any of the panel speakers respond to this. Is there a plan to end the culture of poverty among the disability community in our state? Right, the disability community, and perhaps we can talk about some proposals this year around SSI, SSP, and any other responses to ending the culture of poverty. I can discuss the there is a proposal at the state SSI SSP, which is SSI is this federal income due to SSI, and SSP is what the state adds on to it. Those who receive SSI SSP at $900 and a few dollars a month for an individual, that's only 90% of the federal poverty line, of the official federal poverty line. So there is a proposal this year, which many disability advocates are behind, that would increase SSP by $100 a month to bring it up to 100% of the federal poverty line. So we're just trying to keep you in poverty, but at least not as impoverished. We've been doing at the Arc and UCP doing some data and trying to find out exactly how many regional center clients rely solely on SSI SSP, and where we're coming out is somewhere in the 80 to 90% range of regional center clients. And so SSI SSP is going to be an integral part of the income part of that. The societal cultural part of it is something else where I think employment will be a big part, inclusion, getting people involved in every part of aspect of community, where it's not just a them over there anymore, where it's part of us.
That's what I was actually, we were deciding if I can turn on a microphone. That was my first test. Stephen, I think it's important. One is they have to hear your story, right? Because I can go in there and say, we need to have folks get out of poverty. Do they recognize that there's a issue around poverty? They may. You know what a lot of it is when you go to talk about the housing and the affordable housing piece. Right now what you're hearing is for homelessness and veterans. And they've got to start hearing that it impacts our community just as significantly. I had one of my advocates meet with the mayor of Sacramento, Mayor Steinberg, and they have an assumption that this system will protect them. We're the safety net, right? So they'll never experience homelessness and poverty, because one is you have a system that takes care of you, which we know is not true. But I think that it has to be that they have to hear those stories. So is there a recognition of the poverty issue when we have to fight for Social Security to go up so you can be at the poverty level? That's the tough part, right? You're right. But I think it's getting your fellow advocates to lead that charge, so we support you on that charge. So yes, you need to be in middle class, and I think the DSPs as well, but it has to take you, because me going there and saying, hey, this needs to happen, it's not as powerful as you saying this is why it must happen. So it's going to take a group of really powerful advocates, but I think it's been a struggle that we've had since the beginning of time, right? They first had to understand that that everybody with a disability could and should work and get paid minimum wage. Just that basic foundation has to start there. And yes, they can get full time. And yes, they can get benefits. And yes, they're good employees. We spend a lot of time convincing people that you're extraordinary employees. We just have to make it a matter of the community. And I think integration is a part of that as well.
I think we have to acknowledge that we have a system that was built on the anti-poverty policies of the 60s and 70s, and those anti-poverty policies are traps that keep people poor. That's the way they're structured. And one of the most expensive things you could ever be in this world is poor. And you asked specifically, Stephen, about is there a coordinated plan to get people out of poverty? There's not. I don't see it. What we have to do is just be vigilant on issue by issue. The most significant piece of change I've seen related to allowing people to escape poverty are ABLE acts and ABLE accounts. So ABLE allows people to save dollars that are kept over here and aren't counted toward their federal public benefit eligibility. I grew up on food stamps. I grew up on AFDC. Until you live it, you don't really know it. Growing up, I don't know how our family would have had a nickel to put in one of those accounts, but I do know that we also knew we couldn't. And knowing that we can could have changed things. And that's what the ABLE Act does.
That's what we have to push for the next wave of advocating. I hate to jump in,
Thank you very much, Stephen. We got time for this last question, and this is directed mostly to the State Council and Aaron. Employment first and integrated self-directed services are definitely the right public policies. How are you working with DDS and their consultants to make sure the rate system allows these policies to become realities?
Thank you for directing the conversation to the State Council, or the question to the State Council. I actually think every member on this panel is actively involved in the rate study. And I feel like I've spoken every question, so maybe somebody else wants to talk about how we are individually and collectively working on the rate study that's underway.
Look, I can turn on a microphone too. Jackie had already shut it off. Trying to silence me, I know. I think, Aaron's absolutely right that the rate study is the key piece to this, and trying to find ways, again, through this process to highlight that individuals who support people to work and to live integrated lives shouldn't be minimum wage employees.
Amy, will you give a quick background in a minute on this rate study? What is, and just for foundational knowledge for everybody?
Absolutely. So during the ABX 2.1 negotiations, one of the things that was promised to this community was an honest and open evaluation about the rates that are paid today for services and a recommendation for a rate structure moving forward. So our rates are kind of screwy in California. As Jackie alluded to earlier, provider rates are largely dependent upon which date in time you entered our system. So you can have providers that are providing services whose rates were set in 2005 or whose rates were set in 2008, and they can have very different rates because of artifacts of things like the median rates and rate freezes. And so our rate structure isn't cost-based now. So there is a group by the name of Burns and Associates that is starting some work to begin looking at what are rates now, how do they work now, where are the holes, and making recommendations for rates going forward. That work is supposed to be done by March of 2019. And there will be opportunities for the public to comment about not only what the rates are today and how providers are spending those dollars today, but what are the values that need to drive a new rate system going forward. One of the things that we all need to remember is that budgeting is about priorities. And budgeting is taking a finite pool of dollars and deciding where we're going to spend it. So the budgeting at the state level is much like budgeting my own personal budget. If I have money left over at the end of the month, I need to decide, am I going to save it in some sort of rainy day fund, or am I going to spend it on something I value? And if I'm going to spend it on something I value, how do I make that decision about where that last bit of money goes? And so as a state, we do much the same thing. We know that there's constitutional protections for certain funding pools, like for schools, and then there's money left over to do everything else. And so part of the rate study is taking a look at what are those things we as a system and we as a state value, and then funding those things. And so this really is an opportunity for advocates to come forward and say, the work we do is valuable, and the work that enables people to live in their communities is valuable, and that providers need to be compensated for those things in a way that makes it so they can retain staff, or in a way that makes it so that the state can support a workforce that is skilled at providing services to this population. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barry.
Yeah.
I don't think I can add much.
That was great, yeah.
Sorry.
Would you please help me, and thanks to this panel for an incredible job kicking us off. Thank you guys very much.